Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, July 25th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about former President Trump now not committing to any presidential debates with Vice President Harris ahead of this year's November presidential election. This comes at a time that the Democratic campaign has been taunting the Republicans, asking for a debate, pretty much opening it up, saying anytime, any place that Kamala Harris was willing to debate the former president, in which the Trump campaign responds today by backing out of a presidential debate, citing President Barack Obama, saying, quote, given the continued political chaos surrounding crooked Joe Biden and the Democrat Party, they love that term, Democrat Party, general election debate details cannot be finalized until Democrats formally decide on their nominee. There's a strong sense by many in the Democrat Party, namely Barack Hussein Obama, that Kamala Harris is a Marxist fraud who cannot beat Donald Trump, and therefore are still holding out for someone, quote, better. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to schedule things with Harris because Democrats could very well still change their minds. Now, for all intents and purposes, that is the Trump team backing down out of fear, cowering away from Vice President Harris, and there really is no other way to look at it. Because this actually already happened this election cycle. It wasn't that Trump backed down from a debate with President Joe Biden, but rather that Senator J.D. Vance, who today jokes around, saying he's annoyed that he won't have the chance to debate Kamala Harris, but even in the other timeline in which Joe Biden had remained in the race, he also, too, backed down out of the race. To back down outside of the VP debate, something that was not expected, but honestly, quite predictable. The J.D. Vance and Donald Trump campaign declined to commit to any VP debates, citing the uncertainty around the Democratic nominee. Now, looking at it in hindsight, absolutely it would have been a valid critique. But at the time, it came at which we saw Republicans scrambling as J.D. Vance was chosen as the nominee, as we now see with new national numbers showing J.D. Vance comes in with the lowest favorability rating of any VP nominee in the 21st century to date, including Sarah Palin, on top of the fact that J.D. Vance is an underperformer from 2022, is so far uncharismatic on the campaign trail, and Vice President Kamala Harris clocks him in every single direction. And so looking at it from that lens, it is clear why the Donald Trump campaign and J.D. Vance declined to debate her way back when. But now, it's moving over to Donald Trump. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the lessons they learned from the 2020 presidential election, when President Joe Biden and Vice President Harris were able to win the presidential election, but not without everything going in their favor. Given that everything was decided by roughly 44,000 votes across Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, Democrats were fighting for their lives in every battleground state. Everything needed to go correctly, and evidently it did, including the vice presidential debate, where Mike Pence, who did far better than Senator Tim Kaine back in 2012, the CNN poll showing Mike Pence winning, every other poll showing Mike Pence winning, this time around, we saw that in focus groups on FiveThirtyEight, and polling data that they did, and they were doing with Ipsos, one of the most accurate pollsters in the country, what they found was that in 2020, the vice presidential debate swayed more voters to the Democratic side, and improved Vice President Harris's favorability rating from being +4 to +9 in the duration of a 90-minute debate. What it did was build a new perception around Vice President Harris for a substantial portion of the nation. 1 in 20 people watching the debate we saw changed their opinion of Vice President Harris. That matters because it was almost all in the positive. What Republicans, I think, are worried about now is the fact that a presidential debate could boost and encourage Democrats to become more excited about this election. After she was announced as the de facto nominee who will go on to be the selected nominee by the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris raised $100 million after Biden exited the race. And to date, the Democratic Party has raised over $200 million. Future Forward PAC, on the day that Joe Biden decided to remove himself from the race, raised $150 million on top of the $100 million that the Democratic campaigns across Act Blue, namely the Kamala Harris for President campaign, were able to fundraise. It was an excessive and expansive day for fundraising for the Democratic Party. And Kamala Harris raising over $200 million to date since the announcement is absolutely unheard of. To put this into context, Forbes and many major economic estimates say that the campaigns are expected to cost roughly $1 billion each. Well, in just around a week, Kamala Harris raised $250 million. What normally would take a presidential campaign years to get to this amount of money, Democrats did in a fraction of that time, and I mean a week, a week. Less than. I mean, we are on Thursday. Biden left the race on Sunday. That's how crazy and hectic this week has been. All this conversation around Kamala Harris and this change in candidate has happened so fast and has felt like such a long time. But Democrats are doing quite well. And Democrats are doing quite well because they are looking at this from an objective lens. They're looking at it from the lens of how do we build out enthusiasm around Kamala Harris. And I think we know exactly where to look. You see, on my end, I think Kamala Harris on her own right was already inspirational. But a lot of what we've been seeing in the press with major media endorsements from major celebrities, with more involvement from members of the Democratic Party, all of these Zooms that are being held, like the White Women for Kamala Harris today, which had over 140,000 attendees across the country. And the Democratic campaign has seen over 100,000 new signups for volunteering across the country. There is a newfound energy on the Democratic side. And it continuously has been over the past 4 days invigorated and reinvigorated and reinvigorated and continuously pumped out and pumped out and pumped out and pumped out to a point where now we look at this and say Kamala Harris is on track to do quite well in the election. And some good numbers for Democrats, too, that I think the Republicans are really hoping a good debate showing for the Democrats, given that the bar is quite literally in hell, given the performance of the former president. I mean, you're looking at where we were. Joe Biden himself admitted that it was a terrible, terrible night. Those were his own words. And it was, because it eventually led to his departure from the presidential race. But far more important than that, in an upcoming debate, if Kamala Harris does how she has done in every debate, in every performance, in every speech, in any capacity, Kamala Harris wins the debate by default. Why? Because she will be perceived as more put together than President Biden, more consistent than President Biden, and given President Trump's debate performance in the past, I honestly would not be shocked if she easily trounces him in the overall public perception. Does that mean she's on track for a landslide victory? Absolutely not. But what Democrats are starting to see is momentum is getting back on their side for the first time this entire election season. To give you context as to where we have been, President Trump and President Biden haven't really had much of a competition. While Biden still very much stood to have a strong chance at winning the presidency, it was no more than 50%, and probably around 20-30%. That's why my election prediction after the presidential debate had Joe Biden at 226 electoral votes, less than Donald Trump in 2020 and less than Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was going to be a blowout for Donald Trump at that point in time, which is why I say you're talking less than a third chance at victory there for President Biden. But where are we now? The numbers are far better. Consistent pretty much months on end. Donald Trump led on the national average for the entirety of the election. September 11th, 2023 was the last time that Democrats led nationally. And since then, Donald Trump has maintained an advantage over Joe Biden. And even today, he maintains an advantage over Kamala Harris, but the numbers aren't getting too good for him. All of the recent polls that have been taken, Trump +2. Well, keep in mind, the average against Biden was Trump +3. Then it was Trump +1. Harris +2. Harris +1. Okay, then Trump +3. Rasmussen reports, I'm telling you, throws numbers into this average after the insurrection. Was the only pollster that found that Trump was popular more than he was unpopular. I'm telling you, this is not a legitimate polling agency. One look at their Twitter and you can see that they are retweeting alt-right and far-right agenda tweets. I mean, this is a partisan pollster, and Real Clear Politics, for all intents and purposes, is also an extension of the right wing. With that being said, I'm throwing that out there and taking it out of the equation here because, honestly speaking, I mean, if a Republican wants to take it and play into denialism, that's entirely fair. It'll lose you the election. Looking at it, though, Trump +1, +3, Harris +1, Harris +2, Trump +1, Trump +2. It isn't phenomenal by any means for the incumbent vice president, but it's a starting point that shows they are on track for a more consistent performance nationwide. But here's the killer. Here's where you really see things getting better for the Democratic Party. These two statewide polls out of Maine and New Hampshire show Kamala Harris performing roughly even with what we saw President Biden do back in 2020. Why does that matter? We've had some real high-quality polls come out of battleground states like Georgia, where we see now Landmark Communications, the best pollster in the state, showing Kamala Harris down just 1 point in the state of Georgia. That matters. In Wisconsin, you are now seeing a tie between Harris and Trump. Trump holds less than a point lead. When it was Trump versus Biden, Wisconsin was a 3-point advantage for Donald Trump. When it was Trump versus Biden in Pennsylvania, Trump had a 4.5% advantage. Against Kamala Harris, it's reduced by a point. But what's more impressive, and I think genuinely helps me understand this race a little bit more are these two polls out of New Hampshire and Maine that show Kamala Harris running even with where President Biden was back in 2020. And that Georgia poll only shows a shift of around 1 point. The major shifts are happening on the national level. And don't get me wrong, that's not good news for Democrats. But what is good news is that the states are coming home. The states that Democrats were worried they would have to invest in, like Maine and Virginia and Minnesota, will in fact come home and are coming home. New Hampshire is there. I imagine the next few polls we will see will be out of Colorado, showing Kamala Harris with a 12-point lead. Less than Biden in 2020, but in line with a strong victory. And if it's up at 13, 14 points, Democrats are right back where they were back in 2020. I think what the Trump team, and getting back to this point of the debate, they won't debate Kamala Harris because they know that she is in a good point in terms of momentum. She will be in a good point after she chooses her VP, whether it's Mark Kelly or Josh Shapiro or somebody else. Depending on what happens at the convention, which I imagine she will have a strong convention, Democrats will be coming in to the 2024 cycle with a revitalized look, with a new and inspired look, and a very strong expectation for the upcoming debate, which is why the Trump team, again, won't commit to it. It gives Kamala Harris less time to prep. In full honesty, I don't even think she will. It gives Donald Trump more leverage because the Democratic campaign can't say, we don't commit to a debate either. Because Kamala Harris has been consistent about one thing. She's ready. She's all in. The Kamala Harris campaign says Trump is backpedaling, and backpedaling he is. He has said to multiple media sources, right-wing, left-wing, independent, that he wants to debate Kamala Harris. Well, clearly not enough. It is very, very clear from internal Trump memo leaks, from Trump himself, from Trump's closest campaign advisors, from Republicans across the country, that he is worried. Republicans are worried about facing off against Kamala Harris, and honestly, it makes sense. She comes into this fundraising numbers that we have never seen, setting a new precedent for fundraising across this country. $231 million. $231 million fundraised in 24 hours across Super PACs, Act Blue, the Harris campaign, all with a collective effort of electing Kamala Harris to the presidency. This is one singular day. If I was Donald Trump, I would be scared too. Because this is something that makes a huge impact on an election. Money talks. And now you're seeing Elon Musk cancel his $45 million a month donation, reoccurring donation that he promised Donald Trump. Why? I don't know. But maybe they're reading the writing on the wall that this election is not going to be some Trump slam dunk. Maybe Donald Trump regrets choosing J.D. Vance because guess what? J.D. Vance was the least electable candidate that he could have chosen for vice president, and we all said it, but obviously he doesn't listen to us. He listens to his instinct, and his instinct was to choose loyalty. His instinct was to choose MAGA. But when I tell you this, I mean it. J.D. Vance is an inferior candidate to quite literally anybody else that Donald Trump could have chosen. And I think there were good picks out there. I think Nikki Haley would have been a phenomenal pick for the Republican Party. I mean, you're talking slam dunking the election. Maybe not against Harris, but slam dunking the election against Biden. But that isn't the case. He's in a competitive race against an administration that has an unpopularity rating unlike what we've ever seen. But it's ticking up. And that's bad news for Donald Trump. His whole thing was Joe Biden is the boogeyman and he's not ready to serve our nation. He's too old. And then Kamala Harris comes into the fray and Democrats are treating this like an Obama election. They haven't treated an Obama election since Obama. We have not seen this level of organizing and enthusiasm and fundraising and energy in a very long time. Since before I've been covering elections. This election now feels unlike anything I've ever seen before. And the Trump team is looking at this and saying, we don't want Donald Trump juxtaposed with her on a debate stage with ABC News. Or even Fox News, who they offered a debate with, to which the Kamala Harris campaign said, any time, any place. The Trump team says, not like that. The Donald Trump team very clearly knows they overplayed their hand in the first debate. They know that pushed out President Biden, but Kamala Harris won't be a President Biden performance. We've seen her debate. She took down Mike Pence, and she took away far, far, far more notable and, electable moments than Mike Pence did. She helped a lot in that ticket in 2020, and that's what Republicans are worried about. The Trump team doesn't back out of things unless they think they're losing them. because Donald Trump is all about winning. That's why he doesn't endorse candidates besides incumbents anymore, because he knows that his endorsement record is at stake when he makes an endorsement. The Trump team, again, is very calculated. They do things they think they can win. They thought they would win that first debate, but they also were worried that Joe Biden would pop out in the same way he did at the State of the Union. So they pushed all this narrative around Joe Biden being pumped up on drugs, that this was going to be some type of weird, debate juice moment where Joe Biden has a stellar moment and everyone's like, wait, I thought he was old, but it didn't happen that way. So they walked it back. This time, they're very clearly terrified. Not only was Donald Trump scared once, but he was scared with J.D. Vance. And nothing has changed between the fact that she was the VP nom at that point and now the presidential nominee. There's going to be a lot of conversation around the debate, and I imagine that Donald Trump will be forced to debate Kamala Harris by members of his party who say this is a bad look. That if he eventually doesn't debate Kamala Harris, he loses the election. And that wouldn't be an entirely unfair take. I think there's going to be a lot more that impacts the way that voters perceive the election and how they vote. I think backing out of a debate is never a good look. And if the Biden campaign didn't even do it, that ended the Biden campaign and launched the Harris campaign, for Donald Trump's campaign to do it, it looks far, far worse. And Democrats, I can guarantee, are going to use this to their advantage to leverage any and everything they can to make the debate work in their favor. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.